If you've spent your life chasing success, checking every box, and still wondering, is this all there is? You're in the right place. Welcome to the Overachiever's Oracle podcast, a sacred space where we dive into the lives of professional women who've been taught to measure their worth by how much they achieve. Here, we explore a spiritually rooted path to untangle ourselves from hustle culture and reconnect with who we truly are. I'm your host, Dr. Giovanni Washington, a former overachiever turned liberation guide, and I'm here to walk you through this journey. Welcome to the show. Have you ever made a big, bold move, quit a job, cut your hair, packed up and moved across the country, thinking this is going to be the thing that finally sets me free? And then, weeks or months later, you find yourself sitting in the same patterns, just in a new place? It's happened to all of us. Because here's the thing, not all change is transformation. Today, we're tackling one of the biggest lies out there, the idea that you can make a big change and immediately expect to feel free. So today we'll be exploring why quick fixes and dramatic changes feel good, but don't always create real shifts. We'll be looking at the difference between external change and internal transformation. And then we're going to talk a little bit about how we can stop chasing reinvention and start making real embodied shifts. So let me start by telling you about the capital T, capital H haircut that was supposed to set me free. I was in my second year of my second graduate school program, maybe 28 or 29 years old, and I've been working my ass off at the Pardee Rand Graduate School. I was studying policy analysis, which is super quantitative. So it's grad school, there's papers and research and classes and endless deadlines, but it was just math, and more math. I'm talking microeconomics, macroeconomics, statistics, and econometrics, all in service of optimization and risk analysis in order to assess policy impacts and drive decision-making. Now, if your eyes went cross when I said that, imagine sitting in that program 8 hours a day, 5 days a week. Even now, just saying it, it makes me shrivel a little bit inside. I'm not even sure how I made it as long as I did in that program. But it's no surprise that something inside of me back then felt, stagnant, stuck. Like I got into the program because I was fairly good at math. I was terrible at applying that math to human behavior, which is what econ is. I didn't know anyone who behaved in the way that these models said people were behaving. So it was an interesting, I felt stuck. I felt stuck. I was working and working harder and still was not arriving. I wasn't actually getting anywhere. So that's the container in which I want to tell you about this haircut. So I'd worn my locks for probably a decade at this point. They were beautiful. They were about almost the width of my pinky finger. They were halfway down my back. They were really a part of me. Also, I had this gnawing feeling that I was tethered to something, not because of my hair, but I was tethered to something because of this situation I was in that I needed to outgrow. So Rand was big on the job training, what they called OJT. So while I was there, I was also always working on a project with bona fide researchers that had real world ramifications. Sometimes we would spend up to 20 hours a week doing this OJT. So I was, with professionals, and I began to see that there was a way of life that wasn't just being a student, right? And I was for the first time trying to really try on authority and gravitas and becoming a woman who could hold her own in the professional world. But inside, I still felt young, unfinished, and like people didn't take me seriously enough. And maybe deep down, it's because I was not taking myself seriously. And so then something happened. I don't remember the thing that was said, but we were in some lecture and someone said something, and what I remember is the click. I was like, there was this moment of clarity and decision that happened. I was like, oh, I'm cutting off all my hair. And that night I went home and I said, boyfriend, I want you to cut my hair off. And he was like, no. I was like, yes, I want you to cut it off. And so he wouldn't cut it off until I actually took a clump of the locks and actually took the scissors to my head. So I cut off the first clump of hair. And I experienced what you would expect one would experience when someone cuts off their hair. It was this visceral release that I could feel in my bones. I felt lighter. I exhaled. I was like, ooh, there was an energetic movement through my body. Because hair is not just hair, right? Hair stores energy. It carries memory. It holds on to things we don't even realize we're still carrying. So every strand and every coil and every length of growth represents time, identity, history, and experience. And that's why people say when you cut your hair, you're releasing the past. And that's exactly what I was doing. I was shedding old versions of myself, making room for something new. And for the first week, that's exactly how I felt. It's exactly how you'd expect one to feel after a big transformation. I felt free. I felt light. I felt ready for the world, like I had finally become the woman I was supposed to be. But here's what they don't tell you about the big chop moment. It feels transformative until you realize you're still the same person underneath. Then week 2 hit, and suddenly liberation didn't feel so liberating anymore. I wasn't just feeling free, I was feeling exposed. Because when you go from luscious flowing locks to nothing, when your hair is cropped so short that you can see the curve of your scalp and people can see your thought, it's like you start to see yourself differently. And then suddenly, I wasn't thinking about freedom anymore. I was thinking about acceptance. How do I look? Do I seem too severe? Do I need to start wearing makeup every day? Because that's a thing, y'all. Will people take me more seriously now? Or will they see me as too much? Did I just make a huge mistake? Because in that moment, I realized that I wasn't adjusting to a new look. I wasn't stepping into this new sort of aspirational avatar. I was confronting this old identity that I thought that had gone away with the hair. And by week 3, everything I thought I'd cut away was still there. The self-doubt, the perfectionism, the need for external validation. The haircut didn't remove any of it. It just exposed it. So there's 2 big lessons here. We often mistake the feeling of relief for the feeling of transformation. And I'm going to repeat that. We often mistake the feeling of relief for the feeling of transformation. The haircut wasn't the transformation. The haircut was just a symbol of the transformation that I was actually wanting, but I hadn't yet done that work. And that's the thing about these big dramatic changes. They trick us into thinking we've turned a corner. But the truth is, we've just walked into the same room from a different door. So this isn't just about the hair. It's about all the ways we try to fix our lives without actually doing the deeper work. Because if that haircut didn't change me, what else have I been using as a quick fix? Well, let's talk about it. When the quick fixes don't work, we go for dramatic fixes. But you can bet your bottom dollar that neither quick fixes nor dramatic fixes guarantee true transformation. So a quick fix might be, these are small surface level changes that feel good but don't last, like buying a new journal instead of actually writing, like blocking someone on the socials or on your phone without actually setting real boundaries. It might be, as we just discussed, changing your look instead of changing your self-image. Overachievers in particular turn to things like quitting their job, believing that leaving will solve their exhaustion, or taking a sabbatical, thinking that time off will reset everything, or trying work-life balance hacks, like using time management instead of addressing the real issues. But if you don't change your internal patterns, you'll recreate the same burnout somewhere else. A great example is people who quit corporate to start a business and end up working way more because entrepreneurship is a bear. Or people who leave a toxic workplace only to find themselves in another workplace that is just as toxic. It's kind of like quitting your job to escape burnout is like painting over mold. It looks fresh for a while, but the problem is still growing underneath. So if we're going to do things, if we want to avoid false transformations, if we want to quit the job, we also need to address the workaholism. If we want to move to a new city, we've got to address the fears that are wanting us to move from the first city. If we want to change careers, we really need to heal our need for external validation. And that's the trap. It's thinking that the right external change will save us. But what about when you're doing everything right? The vision boards, the spiritual practices, the discipline, and you still don't get the outcome that you want. This is exactly what happened to me when I tried to manifest my way through this same grad school program, my exams, and I failed. Have you heard of the morning pages? It's a practice that Julia Cameron writes about in her book, The Artist's Way. It's a practice where you write 3 pages of free-flowing thoughts every morning. No filtering, no overthinking, just writing. The idea is that it unlocks creativity, clears the mind, and connects you with deeper wisdom. I had done it before successfully with a group when I lived in Atlanta. I saw how it changed the way that I related to people and how it shifted things in my life. So when I was in this graduate school program at Rand and I was approaching exams, and I will just, again, the container here is this is probably 7 to 8 months after the suicide of my boyfriend, and I'm still trying to push through and pass these exams. It was 8 months after he took his own life, 8 months after I walked into his apartment and found him, and 8 months after my world split open. And so how did I deal with that? Not by slowing down, not by grieving fully, and not by being held in the ways I needed to be. The focus became get back to school, finish your exams, keep moving, get that PhD. Because that's what we're taught, right? Survival means productivity. Healing means functioning. So instead of stopping to process my grief, I did what overachievers do best. I got back to work, I found tutors, I joined study groups, I met with my professors, I did all the things. I structured my way back into academic survival mode. And because I wanted so badly to pass my exams, I was willing to do whatever. And so I decided to add this spiritual layer of effort to passing the exam. So every morning I wrote 3 pages over and over again. I will pass my exams, I will pass my exams, I will pass my exams, or some version of that. Now the idea is you can write the same thing over and over again and eventually it becomes something else, like you just start writing other things. But I treated these morning pages like a spell. It was a manifestation practice, a guarantee. I had done the studying, I had done the academic prep, and now I was doing the spiritual work. And I really believed with my entire being that I would pass. I had to pass, but then I didn't. So there were 3 exams. The irony is that I passed the quantitative exam, but I failed the other 2 exams, which I believe were policy analysis. Oh, and econ. I definitely failed the econ exam. And so ultimately, I was dismissed from Rand. They gave me a master's in policy analysis. You just needed to pass 1 test to get that. And I was dismissed. So in those first few weeks of writing, it felt great. I felt like I was doing something. There probably was a little bit of desperation involved, but there was a sense of control that came with that discipline, right? The structure of the morning pages gave me a false sense of security, though. This is what was happening. It was a false sense of security. I had this belief that if I just did everything right, if I studied enough, wrote enough, believed enough, that I could bend reality to my will. And this is where we get tricked. We think discipline equals transformation. We think structure equals success. And we think spiritual practices will guarantee a particular outcome. But here's what I learned. 1, morning pages are not a spell. They're not a 1, morning pages are not a magic spell. 1, morning pages are not a magic spell. 2, all the discipline in the world couldn't override what was actually happening inside me. And 3, I wasn't just taking an exam. I was in deep grief, deep exhaustion, and deep survival mode. And what I really needed wasn't more structure. What I really needed was to stop and to listen and to feel. So here's what I didn't understand at the time. The morning pages didn't fail me. My belief that I could outwork my healing did. I was still measuring success through colonial, capitalist markers, believing that as long as I followed the steps, as long as I did the work, the outcome would be in my favor. But liberation, healing, and transformation, they don't follow that formula. They don't just happen because you put in the effort. Sometimes they happen when you surrender. And ultimately, being dismissed from that program was a gift. Now, of course, it took me a good decade before I could see it that way. But in hindsight, it actually gave me the space and the time and the spaciousness. Like there was no pressure. I was to do the real work, to actually sit with the healing and to sit with the grief and to sit with the pain. So it wasn't about just passing the test. It was actually letting go of my need for this external validation that was going to come through passing the test, matriculating into candidacy, and ultimately getting that PhD. I mean, I did ultimately get a PhD, but not from there. So I learned this the hard way, right? When we chase quick fixes and dramatic changes, Whether it's career moves, spiritual rituals, whether it's career moves, spiritual rituals, or major life changes, we think we're solving a problem, but we're actually just running from ourselves. So let's talk about that. Let's talk about what happens when we are running from ourselves and the emotional and spiritual costs that are associated with that. We think of quitting, moving, cutting people off, switching careers as ways to regain control. We tell ourselves, if I just leave this job, this city, this relationship, I'll finally feel free. But what happens afterwards? When we make a big external change without addressing internal patterns that created our exhaustion, we don't actually feel free. We feel unmoored. At first, there's a rush of excitement. Yes, I finally left that toxic job. Yes, I finally ended that draining relationship. Yes, I finally moved to a new city for a fresh start. And for a little while, it feels like freedom. But then reality sets in. The same overwork tendencies show up in your new job. The same insecurities resurface in your new relationship. The same patterns of burnout appear, just in a different environment. And suddenly, the same anxiety, the same exhaustion, and the same self-doubt come creeping back in. So if you don't know how to rest before making one of these quick fixes or dramatic changes, you're not going to magically learn afterwards. We think we need a new environment to be free, but liberation isn't about where you are, it's about how you are. So have you ever taken a vacation thinking it would fix your burnout only to feel just as exhausted when you got back? Or quit something thinking relief would follow only to realize the weight wasn't just in the job or the situation, but in what you're carrying on the inside? That's an emotional hangover. That is the emotional hangover of changing your circumstances without changing yourself. And there's a spiritual and ancestral piece to this as well. We've got to be honest. We did not get here alone. Our survival instincts, the drive to work, produce, push through exhaustion, ignore our own needs, didn't appear out of nowhere. They were inherited. Especially for those of us in the African diaspora, for those of us carrying that particular ancestral struggle, the message was clear. You must work twice as hard to get half as far. Rest is a privilege, not a right. And if you stop moving, you will fall behind. So these beliefs weren't mistakes. I have chills right now. The ancestors have entered the chat. These beliefs were not mistakes. They were survival mechanisms. Our survival was based on our ability and capacity to take care of other people who were not our family, right? Or to meet a certain quota that was a ridiculous quota. These beliefs were not mistakes of our forebears. They were survival mechanisms. But we're no longer in survival mode. We don't need to be in survival mode. We have the opportunity, the responsibility, I'd say, to break these cycles, not just escape them. I really believe that our ancestors didn't survive, resist, and fight for us just so we could keep overworking ourselves under different conditions. They didn't see struggle so we could switch jobs every time we were exhausted. They didn't endure oppression so we could find better ways to hustle. They want us to thrive. I really believe that. They want us to break the cycle, not just escape it temporarily. And I have this note, I think we'll have to do a whole nother episode on this about, well, what does it mean to thrive? And my immediate answer, like when I said it this first time, I was like, and also understand that our imagination around thrive can be much bigger than we think it is, right? It can be, I don't say bigger. It can be, we can ask for more, right? The toil that our ancestors endured. I think that we place limits even on our imagination around thrive, but that's a whole other episode, so we'll do that later. But here's the thing. Real liberation means rewriting the story, not just flipping the page. Okay? So if your life is a book, quitting your job, moving cities, or making a big change without doing the deeper work is like skipping to the next chapter without understanding the last one. And we don't want you to keep repeating this habit over and over and over. So a great question to ask yourself to keep in your pocket and pull out every now and again is, are you escaping a situation or are you stepping into transformation? So What does real transformation actually look like? Because just because something feels different doesn't mean it's transformative. Transformation isn't just about switching from one exhausting situation to another. It's about building a new relationship with yourself, your work, your rest. I'm going to say yourself, your play, and your rest. It's about breaking the habit of chasing relief and finally learning how to create sustainable freedom. So most of us have been taught to think that the problem is the job, that the problem is the schedule, that the problem is the workload. But let's be real. If you're always exhausted, the problem isn't the job. It's how you relate to labor itself. Because overworking isn't just a habit, it's an identity. And many of us have been conditioned to believe that we're only valuable if we're producing something. Again, that our worth is tied to our work. So even when we leave a job, we carry the exhaustion with us. And even if we quit something, we find another way to burn ourselves out. So before we talk about what to do next, we have to ask, who am I outside of work? Who am I outside of the hustle? And who am I outside of proving myself? That's the real task at hand. So let's break down 3 key principles that create real sustainable transformation. The first one is depth over distraction. Are you making changes to avoid discomfort or to actually move through it? There's a big difference between running away from something versus running towards something real. Making a change because you're scared versus making a change because you're ready. Do you hear the difference there? You've got to ask yourself, if I didn't quit, cut my hair, move, or leave the situation, what would I actually have to feel? Sometimes change doesn't require action. Sometimes it requires stillness. Sometimes the most radical thing you can do is not make another move. It's sitting in the truth of where you are and actually facing what's there. The second pillar of transformation is embodied change, because transformation is not just mental. It's felt in the body, the nervous system, and also in our spirit. We live in a world that tells us if we change our minds, everything else will follow. But our bodies remember everything. And if your body is still in stress or survival mode, no external change will feel safe. This is why quitting a job doesn't automatically mean that you'll feel free. This is why taking a break doesn't automatically bring peace. Because if your nervous system is still wired for stress, it will still recreate that stress no matter where you go. It's kind of like your nervous system is an old GPS that keeps recalculating back to hustle mode. And if you don't retrain it, it will always lead you back to burnout, just under a different name. So some good questions to ask yourself are, can you practice resting without guilt? Can you allow yourself to slow down without feeling unproductive? Can you start recognizing what safety actually feels like in your body? I think that's a whole nother episode too, safety, right? Okay, and our third principle of transformation are sustainable shifts. Liberation isn't a dramatic leap. It's a series of small, consistent choices. Most people think of transformation as a single moment of awakening, a big, life-changing event. But the truth is, real change happens in the micro moments. Instead of a big escape plan, what if you built a liberation plan? Instead of quitting your job in frustration, what's one small shift you can make to redefine your relationship with work? Instead of cutting off a relationship impulsively, what's one boundary you can set to create more space for yourself? Instead of waiting till you're burned out, what's one daily practice that supports your well-being? The goal isn't just to leave something. It's to build something that actually supports you. So, if you take nothing else from this episode, please let it be this. Not all exits are escapes. Not all leaps are liberations. And not all movement means you're free. If you don't shift your internal patterns, you will rebuild the same cage somewhere else, just with new walls. Because transformation isn't in the leaving, it's in the staying with yourself. Your job, your schedule, your never-ending to-do list, they were never the real problem. The real problem is the belief that if you stop striving, you'll disappear. And the real freedom, it's not in quitting. It's in finally learning how to be. Just to be. without proving, without striving, without running yourself in the ground. Because wherever you go, there you are. And if you can't stop running, you'll never know what it's like to live life on your own terms. You'll never hear what your soul has been trying to tell you, and you'll never learn what it's like to be free.